There is a moment in Naruto where Kakashi Hatake looks at his three students and says, without any hesitation, that those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash. He meant it. He also failed every single student he ever taught. Not most of them. Not the ones before Team 7. Every one. The bell test that Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura are so celebrated for passing. Every team before them failed it and was sent back to the academy. Kakashi's record as a teacher, before these three children walked into his life, was 0 for however many. And what followed was not a redemption of that record. It was a continuation of it, playing out across two kids who grew into legends under other teachers. One kid who became a criminal under his watch, and a system that set all four of them up to fail before the first bell ever rang. Welcome to Animind. This is why Kakashi failed every student he taught. Section 1. The 100% failure rate. Before Team 7. Before a single episode of Naruto ever aired, before Naruto Uzumaki ran through Konoha with his fox grin and his orange jumpsuit, before Sasuke brooded in the back of any classroom, before Sakura pressed her book open on her knee and dreamed about impressing the boy who sat 2 rows ahead of her, Kakashi Hatake had already failed every single student placed in his care. Not most of them. Not the majority. Every one. There is a line in the early episodes of Naruto that most people hear and immediately forget because it sounds like a throwaway detail. When Team 7 is introduced to their new Jonin leader and Kakashi gives them the bell test, the famous exercise where 2 bells hang from his waist and 3 students have to try to take them, the show reveals something quiet and significant about this man. All the Genin teams Kakashi had led before this one went through the same test, and all of them failed it. Not one student from any previous team he supervised had ever passed. Not one had made it through. Every group that came before Team 7 was sent back to the academy. That detail should stop you cold. Because the show moves past it so quickly, with so much style, with Kakashi leaning on a post reading his little orange book and smiling behind his mask, that it is easy to absorb it without really feeling what it means. But sit with it for a second. A man who has never successfully produced a graduate. A man whose entire record before this team is one long string of students who did not make it. That is not a quirky character trait. That is a documented, factual failure rate of 100%. And yet here he is, assigned to 3 more children. To understand how someone this accomplished as a ninja ended up this unsuccessful as a teacher, you have to understand who Kakashi Hatake actually is before Team 7 ever forms. Because the show does something interesting with him. It presents him as cool. It presents him as mysterious. It lets Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura be impressed by him, and by extension, lets the audience be impressed by him. And that impression sticks so firmly that it is easy to skip past the evidence that has been sitting in plain sight the entire time. Kakashi Hatake is, by every measure, one of the most skilled ninja the Hidden Leaf Village has ever produced. He graduated from the academy at 5 years old. He made Chunin at 6. He was promoted to Jonin at 12, the youngest in his generation by a significant margin. He earned the nickname Copy Ninja because his Sharingan, an eye technique he received from his dying teammate Obito, allowed him to copy and store over 1,000 different jutsu from opponents he faced in battle. 1,000. The number is not an exaggeration. It is stated in the series. He has copied more techniques than most ninja ever learn in a lifetime, and he did it simply by watching. He is feared across multiple nations. He is respected by people who fear almost no one. None of that, it turns out, makes you a good teacher. The gap between being skilled at something and being able to teach that thing to someone else is a gap that cuts across every field, not just ninja training. The best basketball player in the world is not automatically the best basketball coach. The most talented surgeon does not automatically know how to explain surgery to a medical student. Skill and instruction are 2 different abilities, and possessing one in enormous quantities tells you almost nothing about whether you possess the other. Kakashi is the copy ninja. He absorbed 1,000 techniques by watching other people. He learned by observation, by his own prodigious ability to replicate what he saw. That is a deeply personal way to learn, and it is not a way of learning that translates easily into teaching someone else. And there is something else, something the show makes clear through Kakashi's backstory. which unfolds slowly across both Part 1 and Shippuden, and which matters enormously for understanding why his record as a teacher looks the way it does. Kakashi Hatake is a person who has been broken, repeatedly, since childhood, and never properly put back together. His father, Sakumo Hatake, a legendary ninja known across the world as the White Fang of the Leaf, a man whose fame and reputation rivaled even the 3 legendary Sannin, chose to save his teammates over completing a critical mission. The village turned on him for it. The very people he had saved turned on him. Konoha, which had celebrated Sakumo his entire career, made him a pariah overnight. The shame that followed was total and relentless. Young Kakashi watched his father, the man he had idolized his entire life, the measuring stick he had used to understand what greatness looked like, get destroyed by the village that man had dedicated his life to serving. Sakumo Hatake killed himself. Kakashi was 6 years old, and the lesson a 6-year-old takes from watching his father be humiliated and then destroyed for choosing people over the mission is not a soft one. The young Kakashi who entered the academy and graduated faster than anyone in his generation was a child who had decided, with the rigid certainty only children can manage, that he would never make his father's mistake. The mission came first, rules came first. Feelings were a weakness that got people killed. He carried this into Team Minato, the Genin group led by the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze, alongside his teammates Rin Nohara and Obito Uchiha. And the friction between Kakashi's cold, mission-first worldview and Obito's loud, passionate belief that teammates mattered more than any objective defined their relationship from the beginning. Obito thought Kakashi was wrong about everything that counted. Kakashi thought Obito was naive and sentimental, and a liability. Then Obito was crushed under a cave-in on a mission, the Kanabi Bridge mission, which Kakashi was leading while Minato was away at the front lines of the war, and gave Kakashi his left Sharingan as a final gift before what everyone believed was his death. And then Rin, their 3rd teammate, was kidnapped by enemy ninja, turned into a living weapon, and threw herself in front of Kakashi's own Chidori to stop herself from being used to destroy the village. Kakashi killed Rin. He did it with his own signature technique. He watched her choose to die at his hands, rather than become a threat to the people they both loved. After Rin died, the anime is explicit about what happened to Kakashi. He developed post-traumatic stress disorder. He had nightmares about killing Rin. He became deeply depressed. He avoided his friends and former classmates. He struggled to complete missions. At one point, his PTSD was severe enough to cause panic attacks during combat. The trauma was not a background detail or a vague reference to hard times. It was specific, documented, and ongoing. Then Minato, his sensei, the closest thing he had to a stable adult presence in his life, a man who was also the 4th Hokage of Konoha, died, sealing the Nine Tails inside a newborn baby on the night Naruto Uzumaki was born. Kakashi was 13 years old, and everyone who had mattered to him was gone. Minato's response to watching his student deteriorate under this level of loss was to assign Kakashi to the ANBU, the Hidden Leaf's Special Operations Unit, a black ops team that carries out assassinations and the village's most dangerous and morally complicated missions. The thinking, according to the series, was that giving Kakashi a sense of purpose might help him survive his grief. What it actually did was take a traumatized 13-year-old and put him in an environment that required him to kill regularly, that valued emotional detachment as a survival skill, and that offered no path toward healing, because healing was not what ANBU was designed to provide. Kakashi spent years in ANBU doing exactly that, killing, operating in the dark, becoming very, very good at being numb. By the time Kakashi Hatake was assigned to lead Team 7, he was 26 years old. He had never processed the suicide of his father. He had never dealt with the death of Obito. He had never come to terms with killing Rin. He had never grieved Minato. He had spent his teenage years and his early 20s being trained, actively and by necessity, to suppress every one of those things in service of the next mission. And into his care walked 3 12-year-old children. This is the context that the show provides for understanding Kakashi's teaching record. Not just the Bell test, not just the favoritism debates that the fandom has argued about for years. The actual root of the problem is this. The man who stood in front of Team 7 on their first morning together had a documented history of losing every student he had ever been given, had never received anything resembling support for his own trauma, and had been professionally trained to prioritize the mission over the people. And here is the part that makes the 100% failure rate land differently when you understand the full picture. The Bell test itself, the test that every previous team had failed, is not a combat test. It is not a test of how strong you are or how many jutsu you know. It is a test of whether students can prioritize their teammates over their own individual success. The entire point, which Kakashi inherited from Minato, who used the same test with his own team, is to see whether students can figure out that working together is more important than competing. The students who fail are the ones who fight alone, who treat each other as competition, who forget that the person standing next to them needs help. In other words, Kakashi had spent his entire life running a test that measures the exact value he spent most of his own childhood rejecting. He had been taught by Obito's death specifically, that teammates matter more than the mission. He built a test around that belief, and then handed that test to students he was going to be emotionally unavailable to guide, because the very tools a teacher needs to help students understand why connection matters — warmth, presence, openness, the willingness to let someone in — were exactly the tools that had been methodically removed from Kakashi through grief, Anbu service, and years of practiced detachment. The 100% failure rate before Team 7 is not a mystery. It makes complete sense once you understand what Kakashi was bringing into the room every single time he showed up to teach. He was bringing the mask, the book, the chronic lateness, the deflection, the jokes that keep people at arm's length. He was bringing a man who had learned that getting close to people leads to losing them, standing in front of a room full of children he was supposed to get close to. And then he was watching them fail a test that required them to understand something he had barely managed to understand himself. Team 7 passed the test. That is the fact the show presents, and it is true. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura figured out what the previous teams had not. They worked together, and Kakashi passed them. It is described as unusual, something worth noticing. The Narutopedia's own description of the event calls them prodigies with extraordinary potential, which is accurate. They were exceptional kids. But passing a Bell test and being successfully taught are two different things. Team 7 cleared the first bar. Everything that comes after, and a significant amount comes after, is where the story of Kakashi's teaching record actually lives. Because the 100% failure rate before Team 7 is not just a statistic about students who could not figure out a puzzle on their first morning. It is a portrait of a teacher who arrived at every one of those mornings, carrying weight he never set down, offering lessons he had learned through loss, rather than through any actual understanding of how to raise someone else. The Bell test problem was never really about the bells. It was about whether the person holding them had anything left to give. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And before we can understand what Kakashi gave or failed to give to Naruto, to Sasuke, and most clearly to Sakura, before we get to the specific, documented moments where his attention went to one student and away from the others, there is something you need to understand about why Team 7 was put together in the first place. Because the third Hokage did not assign Kakashi to this team because he thought Kakashi was the best available teacher. The reason Kakashi got this specific group of 3 kids had almost nothing to do with education at all, and everything to do with what the village needed him to watch. Section 2. He was assigned Team 7 as a surveillance mission, not a teaching one. There is a version of the Team 7 origin story that most people carry around without ever questioning it. In that version, the third Hokage looked at 3 newly graduated academy students, saw their potential, and carefully selected one of the Hidden Leaf's most decorated ninja to guide them into becoming the best versions of themselves. It is a clean story. It feels like the beginning of something intentional. It feels like the right people found each other at the right time. That version is not what actually happened. The real reason Kakashi Hatake was assigned to Team 7 is stated directly in the source material, and it has very little to do with his teaching ability, his relationship with young students, or any belief on the third Hokage's part that Kakashi was the ideal person to shape these 3 particular children. The third Hokage assigned Kakashi to Team 7 primarily to keep an eye on Naruto Uzumaki. That is the documented reason. Not to educate, not to develop, to watch. Naruto Uzumaki was not just a 12-year-old boy with a dream of becoming Hokage and a habit of painting the village monument at 3 in the morning. He was the container for the nine-tailed fox, the most powerful of the nine-tailed beasts, a creature of catastrophic chakra that had attacked the Hidden Leaf Village 12 years earlier and nearly destroyed it. The fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, had given his life to stop the Nine Tails, sealing it inside his own newborn son as the only available option. That son was Naruto, and the village had known for 12 years that the most dangerous force it had ever faced was sitting inside a child who attended their academy, ate their ramen, and slept in their streets. Kakashi was selected to lead Team 7 specifically to monitor that child, to be present, to be close, to be in a position to respond if something went wrong with the seal, if the Nine Tails showed signs of breaking through, if the situation that had defined the day of Naruto's birth showed any signs of repeating itself. This is confirmed in the Narutopedia's own description of Team 7's formation. Kakashi was placed there because Naruto needed a capable, reliable ninja nearby at all times. Someone trusted enough by the village leadership to be given that kind of responsibility. That is a surveillance role. That is a containment assignment. And it was handed to the same man who was supposed to be teaching these children how to become shinobi. In the anime, there is an additional reason layered on top of the Naruto one. Sasuke Uchiha, the third member of Team 7, was the sole survivor of the Uchiha clan massacre, an event that had happened just a few years before the series begins, in which Sasuke's older brother Itachi murdered their entire family and left Sasuke alive. The Hidden Leaf Village had a specific interest in Sasuke as well, for reasons the show explores across both parts of the series. But on a basic level, the village knew Sasuke was a psychological powder keg. A child who had watched his family be destroyed by someone he had loved and looked up to, who had dedicated his entire life since that night to becoming strong enough to kill that person, who carried so much rage that it had already begun to warp the way he related to everyone around him. The anime is specific. Kakashi was assigned to help Sasuke psychologically cope with life after the massacre, and to help him develop his Sharingan, his family's eye technique, the variability that made Sasuke dangerous, valuable, and increasingly difficult to manage. Kakashi, who had carried the Sharingan in his own left eye for years, who understood its capabilities and its costs better than almost anyone in the village, was placed next to Sasuke to guide that specific development. So Kakashi was assigned to Team 7 with 2 parallel missions that had nothing to do with teaching any of his 3 students as individual human beings. He was there to watch Naruto. He was there to manage Sasuke. And Sakura Haruno, the third member of the team, an intelligent, driven girl with exceptional chakra control who had finished at the top of her class academically, was simply the third piece of a puzzle the third Hokage had assembled for reasons that had nothing to do with her. This matters enormously, and it matters in a way the show never stops to spell out directly. When a teacher enters a classroom with a secret agenda, with priorities that pull their attention away from the actual education of their students, the students feel it, even when they cannot name it. They feel who the teacher is really focused on. They feel who the teacher is most concerned about. They feel when someone is going through the motions of instruction, while their mind is actually on something else entirely. Naruto felt it most clearly, because the irony of Kakashi's situation with Naruto is almost impossible to overstate. Kakashi was assigned to watch Naruto because Naruto contained a threat. But Naruto himself, the boy inside the container, the actual child with the actual emotional needs, had been failed by the village his entire life. He had grown up without parents, without anyone to explain to him why the adults in the village looked at him with fear and anger, without a single consistent adult presence who chose to be in his life, rather than simply tolerating his existence. He was the most isolated child in the Hidden Leaf, and the man assigned to be closest to him was there because the village was afraid of what was inside him. The relationship was compromised before it began. Kakashi could not look at Naruto without the weight of that awareness pressing on the back of his mind. And Naruto, who had spent 12 years being looked at as a problem by the village around him, was now being looked at as a potential problem by his own teacher. even if Kakashi was professional enough to keep that from showing on the surface. Kakashi genuinely came to care about Naruto. That is also true, and it is documented across the series. But caring about someone and being designed from the start of your relationship to be their guardian rather than their guide are not the same thing. One of them grows over time into something real. The other shapes the entire frame of the relationship in ways that never fully disappear. The Sasuke situation is even more loaded, because what Kakashi was asked to do with Sasuke, help him manage his grief and develop his Sharingan, was exactly what Kakashi had never been helped to do himself. Nobody had sat down with young Kakashi after Obito died and helped him manage his grief. Nobody had carefully guided Kakashi's own development of the Sharingan with attention to his emotional state. Kakashi had received the eye and then learned to use it in the middle of a war, under conditions that would have destroyed most people, without support or guidance from anyone. He was now supposed to provide something for Sasuke that he had never received himself. There is a particular detail in the series that reveals how much Kakashi recognized himself in Sasuke, and it is not a subtle one. Kakashi said it directly. He and Sasuke were similar. He saw his own younger self in Sasuke's cold focus, in Sasuke's need to prove his ability, in Sasuke's difficulty working with teammates he privately considered beneath him. The mirror was close to perfect. And when a teacher sees themselves in a student, they do not always respond to that student as a teacher. Sometimes they respond as a person trying to correct the mistakes of their own past. Sometimes they give that student more than they give anyone else, not because the student needs it most, but because the teacher needs to give it. That is what happened with Kakashi and Sasuke. The month of private training before the Chunin exam finals, the Chidori, the intense personal investment. These were not purely pedagogical decisions. They were Kakashi trying to do for Sasuke what no one had done for him. And while that impulse is human and understandable, it left the other two members of Team 7 to figure things out largely on their own. But here is the thing about the surveillance assignment that makes it most damaging in the long run. It was not just about divided attention. It was about what Kakashi was optimizing for. When your primary job is to watch someone and manage a potential crisis, you are oriented toward prevention, not development. You are asking what could go wrong, not what could go right. You are assessing risk, not potential. That is a completely different mode of engagement than teaching, which requires you to look at a student and ask what is already there that I can help grow. What does this specific person need that they do not yet have? How do I shape my approach to meet the reality of who this child actually is? Kakashi, by design, was not fully in teaching mode. He was in management mode, and his three students experienced the results of that differently depending on how closely they overlapped with the thing he was actually managing. Naruto was the primary surveillance target. Kakashi watched him carefully, cared about his safety, but the nature of that watchfulness was about what Naruto contained rather than who Naruto was. Sasuke was the psychological risk, the volatile element that needed to be stabilized and directed before it caused damage. Kakashi poured attention into that stabilization because it was what he had been asked to do, and because it resonated with his own history in ways he may not have fully understood. Sakura was neither of those things. She was not a containment concern. She was not a psychological emergency. She was a smart, capable girl who had no special status in the village's ledger of worries. And so she received almost nothing. We will get into exactly how little she received later, because the specifics are worth examining carefully. But the foundation of why that happened is here, in this assignment structure. Kakashi came into the room with a mission that had nothing to do with Sakura, a mirror that only reflected Sasuke, and a watchful anxiety that only activated for Naruto. She fell into the gap between three different agendas and stayed there for the entirety of Part 1. The third Hokage assembled Team 7 the way the village assembled most things, with the village's interests at the center and the children's needs somewhere further down the list. He put three specific kids together because their particular combination of abilities created the ideal conditions for the village to get what it needed from each of them. Naruto would have a reliable watcher. Sasuke would have a guide for his most dangerous ability. Sakura would benefit from being surrounded by two extraordinarily talented boys. That last point is documented. The show states that Sakura was assigned to Team 7 because she would benefit from working alongside teammates stronger than her. Not because the team would benefit from what she brought. because she would benefit from what they brought. She was placed on the team as a recipient of the other's strengths, not as a contributor of her own. That is an extraordinary way to enter any relationship, and it tells you something about what kind of development the village was actually planning for her, which was, essentially, none that required the team's specific attention. Kakashi Hatake walked into Team 7 carrying a surveillance assignment, a personal mirror, a history of unprocessed loss, and a documented record of never having successfully produced a graduate. He walked in wearing his mask and carrying his book and smiling in that deliberately unreadable way that kept everyone at a comfortable distance. And his 3 students looked up at him on their first morning and saw someone cool, someone mysterious, someone worth impressing. They had no way of knowing that impressing him was not actually the goal he had been given. The goal he had been given was considerably more complicated than that, and considerably less focused on them. But the surveillance assignment and the divided attention it created, as consequential as they were, do not fully explain what happened inside Team 7 once the missions started. Because the next layer of the failure is not about what Kakashi was assigned to do, it is about what he chose to do when the moment arrived to actually teach. When Naruto asked for help, when Sasuke needed training, when Sakura stood in front of him with all the potential he could see, and he decided clearly and repeatedly what to do with each of them. Quote 1. What he gave Sasuke, what he gave Naruto, and what he gave Sakura are 3 very different stories. And the distance between them is where the clearest picture of Kakashi's failure as a teacher lives. Section 3. The favoritism problem. What Kakashi actually taught each student. Let's start with what is simply, factually, undeniably true. Kakashi Hatake taught Sasuke Uchiha the Chidori. He spent an entire month training Sasuke one-on-one before the Chunin exam finals. He poured his personal attention, his personal history, and his only original technique into one student's development over the course of those 30 days. The Chidori, a move Kakashi himself created, the technique that is most personally his in a library of over 1,000 copied jutsu, went to Sasuke. Not to the team, to one specific member of it. When Naruto Uzumaki came to Kakashi during that same month and asked for training, Kakashi said no. He referred Naruto to Ebisu instead. Ebisu is a Tokubetsu Jonin, a special rank that sits above regular Jonin in specific areas of expertise. But the show frames this handoff in a way that is impossible to read as an upgrade. Naruto himself did not receive it as one. He pushed back. He wanted Kakashi. He had watched Kakashi work with Sasuke, and he came to his teacher asking for the same investment, and his teacher pointed him somewhere else. What about Sakura? Kakashi taught her to walk up a tree using chakra control. That training happened during the Land of Waves mission, and Sakura completed it before either of the boys did, independently, on her own, without needing the additional guidance Kakashi gave Naruto and Sasuke. He also taught her the basic version of releasing a genjutsu, which she used a handful of times across Part 1. That is the complete list of techniques Kakashi directly passed on to Sakura over the entire course of their time together as teacher and student. Tree climbing. Basic genjutsu release. One student got a technique powerful enough to punch a hole through a human chest, trained over a dedicated month of one-on-one sessions. One student got pointed towards someone else, and one student got 2 things, one of which she essentially figured out herself, the other of which she used so rarely it barely registered as part of her fighting style. That is not an interpretation. That is the documented record. Now, the fandom has argued about this for years, and some of those arguments are worth taking seriously rather than dismissing. One of the most common defenses of Kakashi's approach is that a Jonin leader is not actually supposed to teach their students techniques. The argument goes that Kakashi's job was to guide them through missions, keep them alive, and shape their understanding of what it means to be a shinobi, not to personally hand each of them a new move. Teaching specific techniques is what individual mentors do. Jonin leaders are more like field commanders than instructors. There is some truth in that framing. The show does support the idea that Jonin leaders function differently from dedicated mentors. Guy, who led Team 9 with Lee, Niji, and Tenten, operated with a deeply personal investment in each of his students that went far beyond what most Jonin leaders offered. Asuma, who led Team 10 with Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji, had a specific relationship with Shikamaru that shaped the boys' entire understanding of strategy and sacrifice. These were unusually invested teachers, even by the show's own internal standards. But here's the problem with using the Jonin leader defense to explain Kakashi's choices. He did teach Sasuke. He made the choice himself, voluntarily, to spend a month developing one student's abilities with his full personal attention. Once you make that choice for one student, the Jonin leader argument stops applying uniformly. You cannot say it is not my job to teach techniques and then spend 30 days teaching one. The moment Kakashi decided to personally train Sasuke, he created a standard. And measured against that standard, Naruto got a substitute, and Sakura got almost nothing. The reason Kakashi gave for choosing Sasuke over Naruto is documented and worth examining honestly. The explanation, confirmed in the series and elaborated in analysis, comes down to three things. First, Sasuke had copied Rock Lee's taijutsu using his Sharingan during the Chunin exam preliminaries, after seeing it only once. Kakashi recognized this as a sign that Sasuke's Sharingan had developed to a remarkable degree, and he wanted to build on that. Second, both Kakashi and Sasuke shared a lightning chakra nature, the specific internal type of energy that made certain techniques possible. The Chidori requires lightning nature. Naruto's nature is wind. Kakashi could not have taught Naruto the Chidori even if he had wanted to, because Naruto simply did not have the right internal makeup for it. Third, Kakashi himself said he and Sasuke were similar, and that training him personally would produce the best results. These are real reasons. They are not invented defenses. The lightning nature point in particular is a genuine constraint. You cannot teach a student a technique that does not match their chakra type. And Kakashi only had one original technique. He could not have given Naruto what he gave Sasuke even with the best intentions. But real reasons and complete explanations are not the same thing. The lightning nature issue explains why Kakashi could not teach Naruto the Chidori specifically. It does not explain why Kakashi made no effort to find out what Naruto's chakra nature actually was and develop something suited to it. It does not explain why Naruto spent that crucial month training with Ibisu, who had no knowledge of Naruto's specific chakra type or needs, while Kakashi focused all of his energy on Sasuke. It does not explain why, after Naruto came to him directly and asked for help, Kakashi's response was essentially to turn him away. The wind nature question is particularly pointed. Naruto's chakra nature is wind. Kakashi would eventually come to know this, and in Shippuden, he does help Naruto begin the process of understanding his nature and incorporating it into the Rasengan. But that help comes after the time skip, after Naruto has already spent 2.5 years training under Jiraiya, after the formative period of Naruto's development is already over. The moment when Naruto needed the most foundational support, the months immediately before and during the Chunin exams, was the moment Kakashi was most completely focused somewhere else. And then there is Sakura. The Sakura situation is the most uncomfortable part of this section to sit with, because the show provides enough context to understand why it happened, while also making it impossible to defend as acceptable. Kakashi knew Sakura was talented. He said so. He watched her fight Ino during the Chunin exam preliminaries and acknowledged that her chakra control surpassed both of her teammates. He noted early in Part 2, at the beginning of Shippuden, that he believed Sakura would eventually surpass Tsunade. He saw what was there. He recognized her potential clearly enough to make specific predictions about her ceiling. He just did not do anything with that recognition. Sakura's chakra control was the best of the three. This is a factual statement supported by multiple moments in the series, including Kakashi's own words. Chakra control is the foundation for medical techniques, for precise and efficient jutsu use, for a whole range of abilities that reward fine-tuned internal management of energy rather than raw power. It is exactly the kind of ability a skilled teacher would look at and immediately think about how to build on. A student with exceptional chakra control is a student with a rare foundation. What you place on top of that foundation matters enormously. What Kakashi placed on top of Sakura's foundation was tree climbing and basic genjutsu release. And then he directed his attention elsewhere. There is an additional detail from the Chunin exam period that rarely gets discussed in relation to Kakashi's teaching record, but that reveals something important about how he was managing his team. When Kakashi took Sasuke away for training after the preliminary fights, he told Naruto about it. Naruto knew Sasuke was training with Kakashi. Sakura did not. Nobody told Sakura where Sasuke had gone. She spent the month between the preliminaries and the finals genuinely worried. Not just in the romantic, "this is the boy I like" way the show sometimes frames it, but in the way any person would be worried if their teammate had just fought Orochimaru, received a strange mark on their neck, and then disappeared without explanation, while everyone around her seemed to know something she did not. The information was kept from her. Kakashi kept it from her. And while it is possible to read this as Kakashi trying to protect Sasuke's privacy or manage team dynamics, the effect on Sakura was to make her feel like a secondary member of her own team. Someone who did not need to be fully informed. Someone whose worry was not important enough to address with a basic explanation. This was not a one-time oversight. It was part of a consistent pattern across all of Part 1, where Sakura existed at the edge of the team's actual attention. She was present. She was acknowledged. She was occasionally praised. But she was not developed. She was not invested in. She was not given tools to grow with the way her teammates were, even accounting for the disparity in what Kakashi gave Naruto compared to Sasuke. The result of this is documented by the show itself. Going into the Chunin exams, Sakura was the weakest combat-ready member of Team 7 by a significant margin. She had intelligence, chakra control, and a sharp analytical mind. Real, concrete abilities that a skilled teacher would have recognized as pathways to genuine strength. Instead, those abilities sat largely unused through Part 1. She froze in high-pressure situations. She needed to be rescued repeatedly. She spent most of the Chunin exam forest of death protecting an unconscious Sasuke, cutting her own hair in a moment of determination that the show presents as character development, but that also quietly underlines how little she had been given to work with in terms of actual combat ability. Tsunade looked at Sakura at the beginning of Part 2 and saw immediately what Kakashi had seen and not acted on. She saw the chakra control. She saw the intelligence. She saw the potential for medical ability. And within what the series implies is a relatively short training period, measured in months rather than years, she developed Sakura into one of the most capable medical ninja in the village. She gave Sakura superhuman strength rooted in perfect chakra control. She gave her the ability to heal injuries that would kill most people. She gave Sakura, in the time she had available, something close to the complete foundation that all those months with Kakashi had failed to build. The contrast is not subtle. The same student who spent Part 1 as the weakest member of Team 7, the one Kakashi had not found the time or the framework to develop, became, under different instruction, someone capable of matching and eventually surpassing one of the 3 legendary Sannin in specific areas of ability. The potential was always there. Kakashi saw it and acknowledged it. He just did not teach to it. There is a version of Kakashi's defenders who will point out, correctly, that the Chidori situation was at least partly determined by genuine factors he could not control: Sasuke's nature, their shared similarity, the specific demands of the Chunin exam timeline. Those points deserve acknowledgement. A teacher working within real constraints is not the same as a teacher who simply does not care. But the favoritism argument is not really about the Chidori specifically. It is about a pattern that repeated itself across the entire span of Part 1, in which one student received Kakashi's most personal attention, one received a substitute, and one received almost nothing. And that distribution mapped almost perfectly onto how useful each student was to Kakashi's actual assigned priorities. Sasuke, who needed managing and who Kakashi identified with personally, got everything. Naruto, who needed watching and who Kakashi cared about in a complicated, at arm's length way, got pointed somewhere else. Sakura, who was neither a surveillance concern nor a personal mirror, got the edges of his attention, and a technique she mostly figured out on her own. 100% failure rate before Team 7, an assignment built around surveillance rather than instruction, an attention structure that split 3 students into 1 priority, 1 substitute, and 1 afterthought. These are 3 layers of the same problem, but none of them are the most immediately damaging decision Kakashi made with his team during Part 1. Because the choice that most directly changed the course of these 3 children's lives, the one with the clearest, most traceable set of consequences, had not yet happened. Quote 2. It happened when Kakashi looked at 3 students who had survived 1 dangerous mission and decided they were ready to walk into the most high-stakes competitive environment the village offered. Section 4. Pushing underprepared students into the Chunin exams. Here is what Team 7's mission history looked like before Kakashi recommended them for the Chunin exams. They had completed a series of D-rank missions: catching a cat, babysitting, weeding gardens, the kind of assignments that Naruto complained about loudly and constantly, the kind that made him feel like the village was wasting the abilities of people who had trained their whole lives to become ninja. Then, after Naruto pressured the third Hokage directly and refused to back down, they received a C-rank mission, escorting a bridge builder named Tazuna to the Land of Waves. A C-rank mission, by the system the show establishes, is a job with minimal expected danger. A hired escort. Something manageable for newly graduated genin still finding their footing. That mission turned into an A-rank confrontation before they had been on the road for a full day. Two assassins attacked them almost immediately after leaving the village. These were not ordinary bandits. They were professional killers operating under orders from Gato, one of the most powerful and ruthless businessmen in the region. A man who controlled entire countries through a combination of money and hired violence. And behind those two assassins, already waiting in the Land of Waves, was Zabuza Momochi, a ninja so dangerous he had earned a place on the list of 7 swordsmen of the Mist, a group known across the ninja world as some of the most deadly combatants alive. This was not a C-rank threat. This was a situation that would have challenged experienced jonin, and Team 7 walked into it as 3 newly graduated children. Kakashi made the call to continue the mission anyway. He gave Team 7 the choice, acknowledged the danger, and when they chose to press forward, he supported that decision. And they made it through. Naruto and Sasuke worked together in a moment that surprised everyone, including Kakashi. Sakura protected Tazuna under pressure. The team found ways to function in a crisis that none of them had been trained for. It was genuinely impressive, and the show presents it that way. But surviving something you were not prepared for is not the same as being ready for what comes next. When Team 7 returned to Konoha from the Land of Waves, Kakashi looked at what they had done, survived an A-rank mission as genin, managed to hold themselves together against one of the most feared swordsmen in the world, grown visibly during the experience, and decided they were ready for the Chunin exams. He recommended all 3 of them. He was pleased by their development, the Narutopedia states this directly, and believed they qualified to participate. The Chunin exams are not a simple test. They are a multi-stage evaluation that the entire ninja world treats as a serious proving ground. Other villages send their strongest and most prepared candidates. The exams include a written test designed specifically to trap people, a survival stage inside a forest filled with other ninja who are actively trying to take things from you by any means necessary, and then individual fights in front of a live audience that include some of the strongest young ninja from every major village. Genin who enter these exams are expected to be ready to face people who will not hold back, in situations where getting it wrong can mean serious injury or death. Sakura was not ready for this. The show makes no attempt to hide that fact. She scraped through the written exam. She survived the forest of death primarily by protecting an unconscious Sasuke rather than by fighting effectively herself. When she did fight, when she was cornered by Sound Ninja who came specifically to hurt Sasuke while he was vulnerable, she held on long enough for help to arrive, but the fight made clear how limited her available tools were. She had intelligence. She had determination. She did not have the combat foundation that the Chunin exams demanded, because nobody had built that foundation with her. Screen Rant's documented analysis of Kakashi's teaching record states this plainly. Sakura was in no way prepared, and would always have failed to reach Chunin level at that point. The recommendation to enter was not built on a realistic assessment of where she was. It was built on optimism about what she might be able to figure out on her own. Naruto made it further, but the show is honest about how. He defeated Kiba through a combination of shadow clones and a sufficiently timed moment of flatulence that nobody could have predicted or trained for. He beat Niji, the top-ranked genin in the entire exam by general consensus, a boy described by multiple characters as a genuine genius, through an act of will and the Nine Tails chakra flooding his system at a critical moment. Naruto did not win that fight because of training or technique. He won it because he refused to stay down, and because the creature sealed inside him provided the energy to keep going when any other person would have stopped. That is not a criticism of Naruto as a person. It is an observation about what was actually carrying him. The show is aware of this. It does not pretend Naruto won the Neji fight on technical skill. It frames it as a statement about his character, his refusal, his belief in himself against a person who told him fate was fixed, and some people were born losers. That framing is meaningful and important for Naruto's arc. But from a teaching perspective, the question is not whether Naruto's determination is admirable. Of course it is. The question is whether sending a student into an environment where he would need to survive on determination and supernatural backup, rather than the skills his teacher had built with him, was a responsible decision. Kakashi gave Naruto Ebisu for his preparation month. Ebisu was not a bad ninja. He was competent in his specific areas, but the training with Ebisu went sideways almost immediately, for reasons that had nothing to do with Ebisu's effort, and everything to do with the fact that Orochimaru had placed a seal on top of Naruto's existing seal during the Forest of Death. A seal specifically designed to mess with his chakra control and prevent him from accessing his own energy properly. Ebisu could not have known this. Kakashi did not know this either when he made the referral. But the result was that Naruto's preparation month produced almost nothing in terms of actual training advancement, because he physically could not perform basic chakra exercises while that interference was active. He was rescued from that situation not by Kakashi, but by Jiraiya, one of the 3 legendary Sannin, who happened to be in the area, noticed what Orochimaru had done, removed the interfering seal, and then spent the rest of the month teaching Naruto how to summon toads. Jiraiya, not Kakashi, gave Naruto the most important training he received before the Chunin exam finals. And Jiraiya was not even supposed to be there. He was passing through. He stumbled into the situation. Naruto's preparation for the most important competitive event of his young career came down to a chance encounter with someone who was not his teacher. Sasuke, meanwhile, spent that month with Kakashi learning the Chidori. And the Chidori, as the show later makes very clear, was one of the instruments of Sasuke's destruction. Not immediately, not in a simple direct line, but Kakashi teaching Sasuke a technique of that power during a period when Sasuke was already psychologically unstable, already being pulled toward darkness, already carrying a curse mark on his neck that offered him a different and far more dangerous kind of power. That decision has consequences the essay will return to shortly. But the Chunin exam decision itself is worth sitting with a moment longer. Because the full picture of what happened to Team 7 during those exams is not just about individual preparation. It is about what the exams cost them collectively. None of them became Chunin. Not one. The exams were interrupted by an invasion, the combined attack from Orochimaru and the Sand Village, and the final matches were never completed. So the official outcome of Team 7's Chunin exam experience is that they entered, survived, showed real ability in specific moments, and came out the other side with the same ranks they went in with. Genin. All 3 of them. The same rank they had the day they left the academy. But the invasion being what stopped the exams is almost beside the point. Because the damage that happened to Team 7 during those exams went much deeper than their rankings. Sasuke received the curse mark from Orochimaru in the Forest of Death, a dark and invasive technique sealed into his body that gave him access to power at the cost of his own stability, and eventually, his connection to anything that had been keeping him grounded. That mark became one of the primary tools Orochimaru used to pull Sasuke toward him. And Sasuke received it because he was in the Forest of Death as part of an exam his teacher had recommended him for. Kakashi did respond to the curse mark. He applied a seal of his own to try to suppress it, and he warned Sasuke not to use it during his match with Gaara. Sasuke complied. The show acknowledges that Kakashi tried to contain the damage. But containing damage after the fact is a different thing from preventing the conditions that caused it, and the condition that caused it was Sasuke being in those woods in the first place. The Screen Rant analysis of Kakashi's teaching decisions makes a blunt observation about the Chunin exam recommendation. All 3 students needed another year to grow stronger, and instead, Kakashi pushed them forward. That push forward put Sasuke in Orochimaru's path. It put Sakura in a situation she was not equipped to handle. It put Naruto in a position where his survival came down to things his teacher had nothing to do with. There is a version of the defense that says you cannot shelter students from risk forever, that the only way to grow is to face genuine pressure, that Kakashi's willingness to push them was actually a sign of his faith in them. That version has a surface logic to it. Growth under pressure is real. Being tested by hard situations produces things that comfortable training cannot. But there is a difference between productive pressure and exposure to situations where the main things keeping you alive are luck, supernatural backup, and other people's intervention. The Chunin exams, for 2 of Kakashi's 3 students, were closer to the second than the first, and the mark left on the team's 3rd member did not fade when the exams ended. The Chunin exam decision reveals something specific about how Kakashi assessed his students. He looked at what they had managed to do: survive the land of waves, show growth, demonstrate real moments of ability, and he used that evidence to conclude they were ready for the next level. That is a reasonable-sounding process. Teachers are supposed to push students forward based on evidence of growth. The problem is what Kakashi was measuring. He was measuring performance under extreme, unplanned conditions. He was measuring what they could do when everything was on the line and there was no choice but to figure it out. That is one kind of readiness. It is not the same as the readiness that comes from having actually been taught, having been given a foundation, having been built up methodically by someone who understood your specific gaps and worked to fill them. Sakura's gaps had not been filled. Naruto's gaps had not been filled. Sasuke's gaps had been addressed, but in a way that prioritized his power over his stability. And all 3 of them paid for that in different ways. The Chunin exam entry is a decision Kakashi made with good intentions. That much is fair to say. He believed in his students. He wanted them to have the opportunity. But good intentions and sound judgment are not the same thing, and the consequences of that recommendation stretched far beyond anyone's rankings or test results. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The deepest consequence was not even visible yet when the exams ended. It became visible a little later, when a boy who had been handed enormous power without the psychological grounding to hold it safely made a choice that broke Team 7 apart completely. And the weapon he used to start down that road was the one his teacher had personally given him. Section 5. Teaching the Chidori to an emotionally unstable student. There is a moment early in Kakashi's own story, before Team 7, before Naruto, before any of the events the show is actually about, that the series wants you to remember when you watch what happens with Sasuke. Kakashi was 12 years old. He had just been promoted to Jonin, the youngest in his generation. He was leading his team on a mission to destroy the Kanabi Bridge, and Minato had been pulled away to the front lines of the war, leaving Kakashi in charge. Before leaving, Minato gave Kakashi a specific warning. Kakashi had tried to use the Chidori against an enemy scout named Mahiru, and the attack had nearly gotten him killed. The technique works by concentrating lightning chakra into the user's hand and then driving forward at extreme speed. But that extreme speed creates a problem. When you move that fast in a straight line, you lose the ability to react to what is happening around you. You are committed entirely to the forward motion. You cannot dodge. You cannot adjust. You are open to counterattack from any direction except the one you are charging toward. Minato stepped in and saved Kakashi's life during that encounter. And before he left for the front lines, he told Kakashi directly, "Do not use the Chidori again." This is documented in the series. Minato, who had given Kakashi the foundation for that technique in the first place, recognized immediately that it was dangerous. Not just because of its power, but because of what it demanded from the person using it. The Chidori requires total forward commitment. It requires a person to narrow their entire focus to a single point and drive toward it with everything they have, leaving themselves exposed on every other side. In the hands of someone calm, someone with sharp perception and good awareness, someone who can read a battlefield accurately and choose their moment carefully, the Sharingan specifically helps with this by expanding the user's ability to track what is happening around them, which is why Kakashi developed the technique for himself in the first place. But in the hands of someone who is already prone to tunnel vision, already prone to charging forward without thinking, already prone to letting rage override judgment, the Chidori does not make that person more dangerous in a controlled way. It makes them more dangerous in an uncontrolled way. Sasuke Uchiha, at the time Kakashi taught him the Chidori, was one of the most emotionally unstable people on the show. That is not a casual assessment. The show documents it carefully. Sasuke had watched his entire family be murdered by his older brother. He had been left alive specifically, Itachi told him, so that Sasuke would grow strong enough to be worth killing, so that when Itachi eventually came back to finish the job, there would be a real fight. Sasuke had built his entire identity around this. Every morning he woke up with the same purpose: become strong enough to kill Itachi. Every decision he made ran through that filter. Every relationship he had was measured against how it served or threatened that goal. This had already begun to visibly damage him before the Chunin exams started. His rivalry with Naruto had escalated to a point where both of them were using lethal techniques against each other in what started as a casual rooftop argument. Kakashi intervened in that specific moment. He stepped between them and stopped the exchange. But he noted afterward that he was troubled by how quickly their rivalry had reached a point where they were willing to kill each other. Not spar, not compete, kill. Two members of the same team, aiming genuine killing techniques at each other in the middle of the day, in the village, in front of their teacher. Then Itachi came to the village. This happened during the period between the Land of Waves and the Chunin exams. Itachi, who was operating as a member of Akatsuki at this point, appeared in Konoha as part of a mission to locate Naruto. Several Jonin attempted to stop him and were defeated. Kakashi himself was hospitalized. And Sasuke, who heard that his brother was in the village, ran off to find him before anyone could stop him. He found Itachi. The fight lasted seconds. Itachi destroyed Sasuke with almost no effort and left him broken on the ground, body and mind, leaving behind a specific parting message: "You are still not worth killing." What this did to Sasuke is described in the show and is not subtle. The gap between where Sasuke was and where he needed to be to face Itachi was not just large, it was humiliating. It was a message delivered with complete contempt. And Sasuke absorbed it and turned it into fuel, the way he always turned everything into fuel. But the temperature of that fuel was now considerably higher than it had been before. This is the Sasuke that Kakashi decided to train with his most personal technique. The official reason Kakashi gave for choosing to teach Sasuke the Chidori during the Chunin exam preparation month is the one examined in the previous section. The lightning nature match, the Sharingan development, the personal similarity. Those reasons are real. But the decision to teach a specific technique to a specific student is not just a question of technical compatibility. It is a question of whether that student is in the right place to receive it. Whether they have the grounding, the stability, the judgment to use it wisely. Whether giving them more power at this specific moment in their development will make them better, or simply make them more capable of doing damage. Sasuke did not have the grounding. The show makes this clear not through a single dramatic moment, but through an accumulation of details. He was fixated to the point of self-destruction. He was using his rivalry with Naruto as a measuring stick for his own worth, which meant that every time Naruto showed visible improvement, Sasuke experienced it as a personal threat. He had just been publicly and completely humiliated by the person he had spent years preparing to fight. He had a curse mark on his neck from Orochimaru that was actively offering him a different path to power, a darker, more immediate one. And the pull of that offer was already visible in the way Sasuke was talking and moving and making decisions. Kakashi knew all of this. The show does not let him off the hook by having him be unaware of Sasuke's state. He saw the escalating rivalry with Naruto. He was present for the aftermath of the Itachi encounter. He applied the seal to suppress the curse mark himself, which means he was directly engaged with the fact that Sasuke had been marked by Orochimaru, and that the mark represented a threat to Sasuke's stability. He warned Sasuke not to use the curse mark during his match. He understood the risk. And then he spent a month making Sasuke faster, stronger, and more lethal. The Chidori, as Kakashi taught it during that preparation month, was framed specifically as an alternative to the curse mark's power. This is documented in the official Naruto birthday column covering Kakashi's history with Team 7. The idea, as Kakashi presented it, was to give Sasuke a path to the power he was chasing that did not require him to accept Orochimaru's gift. If Sasuke could see that he could become strong through his own effort, through legitimate training, through what he could build with his teacher, then maybe the curse mark's offer would become less appealing. This reasoning is genuinely thoughtful. It shows Kakashi thinking about Sasuke's psychology, not just his combat ability. It shows a teacher trying to address the root problem, not just manage the surface behavior. But the execution of this idea had a flaw at its center. Giving Sasuke more power was not actually addressing the root problem. The root problem was not that Sasuke lacked a strong enough technique. The root problem was that Sasuke had built his entire identity around a goal that was consuming him, and he had no framework, no relationship, no internal resource, no belief in anything beyond that goal to fall back on when the pursuit of it became too much. More power fed the goal. More power made the pursuit more intense. More power did not give Sasuke any of the things he actually needed. What Sasuke needed during that month was not the Chidori. He needed someone to sit with him and help him understand what he was doing to himself. He needed someone to engage with the grief underneath the rage, the grief of a child who had loved his family and had that love turned into a weapon against him. He needed someone to challenge the belief that his entire worth as a person was contained in his ability to kill one specific person. He needed a conversation that went past technique and strategy and into the actual human being inside the prodigy. Kakashi tried to have that conversation. This is also documented. After Sasuke's match in the Chunin exams, after the invasion began and the finals were disrupted, Kakashi found Sasuke and tied him to a post, and talked to him directly. He told Sasuke that revenge would not bring back the people he had lost. He told Sasuke that the people he still had, Naruto and Sakura, were worth more than the goal he was chasing. He encouraged Sasuke to use the Chidori the way it was intended, to protect people, not to attack them. It was, by every account, almost enough. The Narutopedia's entry on Kakashi describes this moment and notes that Sasuke was very clearly about to come back, about to choose the team, about to step back from the edge he had been standing on. The words were landing. The argument was reaching him. And then the Sound 4 arrived with better timing than anyone had any right to expect and pulled Sasuke back to the other side of that decision before it could set. Kakashi left for a mission immediately after that conversation, trusting that what he had said would sink in while he was gone. That trust was not unreasonable on its face. He could not have known the Sound 4 were coming, could not have predicted that the precise moment he walked away would be the moment Sasuke's choice got made for him. But the timing reveals something about the structural problem with how Kakashi handled Sasuke throughout. He addressed the emotional reality of the situation in one conversation. After months of building Sasuke's power without building his stability, the power came first and accumulated slowly. The conversation came once, and then Kakashi walked away from it. One conversation after months of technique training is not balance. It is correction attempted too late, and it did not hold. Sasuke left. He took the Chidori with him to the Valley of the End, where he used it against Naruto in a fight that nearly killed them both, and that ended with Sasuke walking toward Orochimaru and away from everything Team 7 had been. The technique Kakashi had spent a month personally teaching him, the only original move Kakashi had ever created, was the weapon Sasuke chose for the moment he severed his connection to his team. There is something almost impossible to ignore about that specific detail. The Chidori is Kakashi's. It is the one thing in his entire arsenal that he actually made rather than copied. And the student he trusted it to used it to try to kill his best friend and then disappear into the arms of the man who had marked him in the forest. The show does not make Kakashi a villain for teaching Sasuke the Chidori. It does not present the decision as simple or the outcome as inevitable. There are too many moving pieces, too many other forces acting on Sasuke, for the Chidori to be the single cause of anything. Orochimaru was there. The curse mark was there. Sasuke's own history and pain and choices were there. Kakashi did not create those things. But what a teacher gives a student shapes what that student has available when the worst moments arrive. Kakashi gave Sasuke speed, power, and a lightning strike that could puncture stone. He gave him one conversation about why those things should be used for protection rather than destruction. And when the worst moment arrived, when Sasuke made the decision that changed everything, the power was more present than the conversation. That is the specific weight of teaching the Chidori to an emotionally unstable student. Not malice, not carelessness exactly. Something more complicated and more human than either of those things. A teacher who understood the risk and tried to address it, but addressed it with another technique first and with words second, at a moment when the order of those two things mattered more than anything else. Kakashi admitted, after Sasuke was gone, that he had not spent enough time on the emotional side of things. He said so directly. He blamed himself. And that self-knowledge, real, honest, clearly felt, was entirely accurate and entirely too late. Sasuke's defection changed everything for Team 7. But what happened next, what Kakashi did and said in the aftermath, how he accounted for himself when there was no longer any way to avoid looking at what had happened, is the part of this story that reveals most clearly what kind of teacher Kakashi actually believed himself to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because he did not deflect. He did not find a way to frame it as Sasuke's failure rather than his own. He said something that almost no one in his position would say. Section 6. The Sasuke defection. Kakashi's own accounting. The night Sasuke left, Kakashi was not there. That is the first fact, and it matters. When Sasuke walked out of Konoha in the dark and headed toward the Sound Four who were waiting to escort him to Orochimaru, Kakashi was away on a mission. He had left after his conversation with Sasuke, the one where he tied him to a post and told him revenge was not worth losing the people still beside him, believing that what he had said would hold. He came back to find that it had not. Tsunade was the one who told him. Sasuke had defected. Naruto and a group of genin had already been sent after him. By the time Kakashi learned what had happened, the chase was already over and Naruto was unconscious at the Valley of the End, with wounds that should not have been survivable. Kakashi went and retrieved Naruto personally. He found him at the Valley of the End, soaked in rain, lying where the fight had ended. He brought him back. And somewhere between retrieving his student and processing what had happened, Kakashi did something that is worth examining very carefully, because it is not what most people do when something this large goes wrong on their watch. He did not look for someone else to blame. The show is explicit about this. After Sasuke's defection became real and undeniable, Kakashi identified it as his own failure. Not Sasuke's failure, not the Sound Four's interference, not Orochimaru's manipulation, even though Orochimaru had been engineering this outcome from the moment he put the curse mark on Sasuke's neck in the Forest of Death. Kakashi looked at what had happened to his student and said, in effect, "This is on me. I did not do enough. I failed him as his teacher." This self-accounting appears across multiple points in the series and is not a single moment of guilt that passes quickly. It is a position Kakashi held and returned to. In Shippuden, when news reaches Konoha that Sasuke has not just stayed with Orochimaru, but has actively joined Akatsuki, has become a criminal recognized across the ninja world, responsible for attacks on other villages and their leaders. Kakashi's response is documented. When Sakura, having accepted that Sasuke could not be saved by waiting, decided to go after him herself with the intention of killing him before he caused a war, Kakashi found out through Sai. He did not let her go alone. He went after her. And the reason he gave, the reason he told Naruto for why he personally intended to be the one to deal with Sasuke if it came to that, was that it was his responsibility as Sasuke's former teacher. He used that specific framing. His responsibility. His failure to prevent what Sasuke had become. The teacher's accounting, not the village's accounting or the enemy's accounting. To understand how significant this is, you have to understand what it would have been easy for Kakashi to say instead. He could have pointed to Orochimaru, who had targeted Sasuke deliberately, who had placed the curse mark on him, who had sent the Sound Four to recruit him at the precise moment Kakashi had finished his conversation and walked away. That is a real external force. No reasonable person would have argued with Kakashi if he had identified Orochimaru as the primary cause of Sasuke's path. He could have pointed to Sasuke's own choices. Sasuke was not a child being passively acted upon. He was a person making decisions, and the decision to leave was ultimately his. He could have pointed to the grief and trauma from the Uchiha massacre that predated anything Kakashi had done or could have done. All of those things were true. All of them were contributing factors. Kakashi acknowledged none of them as excuses. He held the failure where he believed it belonged, which was with himself. There is a particular conversation in the show that crystallizes this most clearly. It happens during the period in Shippuden when Kakashi confronts the reality of what Sasuke has become and what that means for everyone still connected to him. Kakashi says directly that Sasuke's departure was a crisis he felt responsible for, because he had been the teacher who failed to prevent it. He carries this not as a passing regret, but as something structural in how he understands his relationship to Team 7. Every subsequent decision he makes about Sasuke, whether to pursue him, whether to protect him, whether to stop others from killing him, whether to potentially do that himself, runs through the frame of a teacher who knows he did not do enough when it counted. This is not a character who has processed his guilt and moved past it. This is a character who is carrying it actively and making choices shaped by it years after the original event. Now, the question the essay has to be honest about is this: does Kakashi's willingness to take responsibility for Sasuke's defection actually mean the defection was his fault in the way he describes it? Or is there something else happening? A person prone to self-blame, shaped by a lifetime of loss and guilt, adding Sasuke to a list of failures that he holds himself responsible for, regardless of how much control he actually had. Both things can be true at once. Kakashi can be genuinely culpable in specific, documentable ways, while also being someone whose personal history makes him reach for self-blame as a default response. The goal here is not to let Kakashi off the hook by psychologizing his guilt away. It is to be precise about what he was actually responsible for and what he was not, because the precision matters more than a clean verdict in either direction. What Kakashi was responsible for is this: he identified early that Sasuke was psychologically volatile and on a dangerous path. He responded to that identification primarily by training Sasuke's power rather than stabilizing his foundation. He gave Sasuke the Chidori: more capability, more speed, more lethality. While the emotional work of addressing what was driving Sasuke toward darkness was done in a single conversation at the end of a month of technique training. He left for a mission immediately after that conversation, trusting the words to hold without being present to reinforce them when the Sound 4 arrived. He had recognized, his own words confirm this, that he had not spent enough time on the emotional dimension of Sasuke's situation. He said so after the fact. The recognition was real and came from a place of genuine self-awareness. What Kakashi was not entirely responsible for is this: Orochimaru targeted Sasuke before Kakashi had any opportunity to intervene. The curse mark was placed during the Chunin exams, in a setting where Orochimaru disguised himself specifically to get past security. Kakashi could not have reasonably foreseen that particular attack. The Sound 4's arrival at the precise moment after his conversation with Sasuke, the moment when Sasuke was closest to coming back, was a piece of timing that no teacher could have anticipated or controlled. And Sasuke's own grief, the core wound from the massacre, was not something Kakashi created or could have undone through technique training or even better emotional engagement. That wound predated Team 7. It would have required years of careful, consistent support to address in any meaningful way, and the structure of how ninja teams operated in Konoha did not provide for that kind of long-term therapeutic attention. The honest accounting sits somewhere between Kakashi blaming himself completely and Kakashi bearing no responsibility at all. He made specific choices at specific moments that made Sasuke's departure more likely rather than less. He recognized those choices as failures afterward and said so. That recognition, while genuine and important, did not change what had already happened. What makes this section of Kakashi's story most significant for the larger argument of this essay is not actually the defection itself. It is what the defection reveals about the pattern. Because Sasuke is not the only student Kakashi would eventually feel he had failed. He is simply the most dramatic example, the one that produced a missing ninja, an international criminal, a threat to multiple villages, and a war that eventually involved every major ninja nation on the continent. The scale of the Sasuke failure is so large that it tends to overshadow the quieter failures with the other two students. Naruto and Sakura did not defect. They did not become criminals. They grew into extraordinary ninja who saved the world, which makes it easy to look at their outcomes and conclude that Kakashi's teaching must have been adequate after all, because look how they turned out. But outcomes and processes are different things. The fact that a student eventually becomes exceptional does not retroactively prove that their teacher was responsible for that excellence. Naruto became who he became primarily through Jiraiya's training, through his own relentless determination, and through the specific nature of what he carried inside him. Sakura became who she became primarily through Tsunade's instruction and her own disciplined effort. Both of them grew into their full abilities after leaving Kakashi's direct guidance, under teachers who were not Kakashi, in the 2.5 years between Part 1 and Shippuden. Kakashi's self-accounting for Sasuke is honest and shows a person capable of genuine reflection. But the reflection, characteristically, came after the window for action had closed. He recognized what he had not done enough of when there was no longer any opportunity to do it. He identified the emotional work he had skipped when the student who needed it was already gone. This is a pattern worth naming. Kakashi is, across the series, a person who understands what went wrong with exceptional clarity after it has gone wrong. His analysis of his own failures is often accurate, sometimes even more accurate than the show's own framing of those failures. He is not someone without self-awareness. He is someone whose self-awareness arrives consistently too late to change the outcome it is analyzing. This is connected, in ways the show makes clear through his backstory, to how he learned to process things generally. The ANBU years were not years of reflection and growth. They were years of performance and suppression. A person trained to complete the mission and bury the cost does not automatically develop the habit of stopping mid-mission to ask whether what they are doing is working. They complete first and account later. Kakashi brought this habit into teaching with him, and it expressed itself as a pattern of acting on his instincts. Train Sasuke, refer Naruto elsewhere. Watch Sakura develop on her own, and processing the results only after they had fully materialized. By the time those results had fully materialized with Sasuke, Team 7 was gone. Naruto was leaving to train with Jiraiya. Sakura was becoming Tsunade's student. Kakashi had no students to lead anymore, the Narutopedia states this plainly, and resumed his prior mission schedule as though the last several months had been a chapter that was simply over now. And the three children who had been in his care walked into their next stages of development with whatever Kakashi had given them, which, depending on which of the three you were, was either a dangerous technique and a month of personal attention, a referral to someone else, or tree climbing and a rarely used genjutsu release. The self-accounting is real. The responsibility is real. The failure is real. But none of those things exist in isolation, and to understand why Kakashi moved through all of it the way he did, why a man this intelligent, this capable, this genuinely caring made the specific choices he made, you have to go back to the place where he learned what a teacher was supposed to be. Because Kakashi did not invent his approach to teaching from nothing. He learned it from someone. And the person who taught him what a sensei looked like, who shaped his entire understanding of what it meant to guide young ninja, was carrying his own unfinished grief and his own unaddressed trauma into his teaching, the same way Kakashi later carried his. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The pattern did not start with Kakashi. It started one generation earlier. And understanding where it started is the only way to understand why it was so difficult to break. Section 7. Kakashi's PTSD and what it cost his students. There is a specific image the show returns to more than once when it wants you to understand something true about Kakashi Hatake. He is standing at a stone monument in Konoha, the memorial stone where the names of fallen ninja are carved, alone, reading the names, talking quietly to people who are not there. He tells them about his life. He tells them about recent events in the village. He tells them about people they knew. And mostly, the show makes clear, he tells them that their deaths were his fault, that he is sorry, that he wishes they were still here. He does this regularly, not occasionally, regularly. It is a habit built into the structure of his daily life, visiting a stone in order to speak to the dead, because the dead are more present to Kakashi Hatake than most living people ever manage to be. This is not a dramatic flourish the show invented to make him seem deep. It is a documented behavior that sits at the center of who Kakashi is by the time he becomes a teacher. And understanding it fully means going back to where it started. Not with Obito or Rin or Minato, but earlier than all of them, with a 6-year-old boy watching his father be destroyed by the village his father had spent his entire life protecting. Sakumo Hatake, Kakashi's father, was one of the most celebrated ninja the Hidden Leaf had ever produced. His reputation was so large that he was spoken of in the same breath as the 3 legendary Sannin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru, who were themselves considered among the most powerful ninja alive. People across multiple nations knew Sakumo's name. He was respected, admired, and feared in the way that only the genuinely exceptional are. And young Kakashi, his son, grew up inside that reputation, measuring himself against it, understanding greatness through the lens of what his father represented. Then Tsukumo made a choice that the ninja world punished him for completely. On a critical mission, he abandoned the objective to save his teammates. The mission failed, and the response from Konoha, from the village, from the people he had saved, from the community that had celebrated him his entire career, was total rejection. They blamed him. They shamed him. They turned his greatest act of human decency into the thing that defined his disgrace. The man who had been a legend became a pariah, and there was no recovering from it, and Tsukumo Hatake killed himself. Kakashi was 6 years old when this happened. Research into trauma is consistent on one point that is directly relevant here. The earlier in a person's life a traumatic event occurs, the more deeply it shapes the structures they build to understand and navigate everything that comes after. A 6-year-old does not have the mental tools to process a parent's suicide. They do not have the language for it, the context for it, the capacity to separate what happened from what it means about them and the world. They absorb it whole, without filters, and it becomes part of the foundation on which everything else is built. What Kakashi built on that foundation was a rigid, rule-following, mission-first approach to being a ninja. His father had chosen people over the mission and been destroyed for it. The lesson young Kakashi took was clear and absolute. The mission comes first. Feelings are a vulnerability. Connection is a risk. Rules exist to protect you from the kind of judgment that destroyed his father, and following them exactly is the only safe way to operate. He carried this into Team Minato, where it collided almost immediately with Obito's completely opposite worldview. Obito believed teammates mattered more than any objective. The two of them argued about this constantly, and with genuine feeling. And then the mission at Kanabi Bridge happened, and Obito was crushed under falling rocks, saving Kakashi's life. And in his final moments, he gave Kakashi his Sharingan and told him to take care of Rin. And in that moment, the argument Kakashi had been having with Obito for their entire time as teammates was settled. Not through reasoning or debate, but through loss so immediate and physical that it could not be argued with. Obito was right. Kakashi understood that now. He understood it in the way you only understand things that cost everything to learn. But understanding something through catastrophic loss, and being able to integrate that understanding into how you live and function, are two completely different things. Kakashi learned Obito's lesson. He did not know how to carry it without being crushed by it. Rin died next. The show is specific about what this did to Kakashi. In the anime, after Rin threw herself in front of his Chidori and died at his hands, Kakashi developed post-traumatic stress disorder. The word is used. The symptoms are shown. He had nightmares. Specific, recurring nightmares about the moment of Rin's death, about his hands, about what he had done. He became depressed in a way that was visible and persistent. He avoided his friends and former classmates. He spent his days keeping people at a distance and his nights being pulled back to the worst moment of his life by dreams he could not control. Post-traumatic stress disorder, when it is not treated, does not stay static. It does not remain at the level it starts at and then slowly fade on its own. In many cases, it deepens, spreads, and begins to affect more and more of how a person functions. It changes the way they relate to other people, creating distance, reducing the capacity for emotional availability, making genuine connection feel dangerous, because genuine connection means something to lose. It changes the way they think about the future, making it hard to plan for or invest in things that require a belief that the future will actually arrive. It changes the way they experience the present, pulling them repeatedly back to the past, to the traumatic events, to the feelings and images and physical sensations associated with those events. Kakashi's PTSD was not treated. Minato, who was aware that Kakashi was struggling, responded by assigning him to ANBU. The intention was to give Kakashi purpose, something to focus on, a reason to keep going. And in the short term, it may have functioned that way. Purpose can serve as a coping tool, especially for people trained in high-performance environments, where doing the next thing is always more available than feeling the current thing. But ANBU is not a therapeutic environment. It is the opposite of one. ANBU operatives are selected for their ability to perform under extreme conditions without letting their emotional state interfere with the mission. The entire culture of that organization rewards the suppression of feeling, the prioritization of the objective, the capacity to do difficult and morally complicated things without allowing them to register as traumatic in the moment. Kakashi, who was already a person trained by his father's death to push feeling down and keep moving, was now in an environment that valued and reinforced exactly that capacity. He got very good at it. Of course he did. Kakashi gets good at whatever he turns his attention to. That is documented across his entire history. But getting good at suppressing your trauma is not the same as healing from it. It is more like building a stronger container for something that is still there, still active, still pressing against the walls you have built around it. By the time Kakashi received Team 7 at 26 years old, he had been carrying unprocessed grief and trauma for 20 years. His father's suicide when he was 6, Obito's death when he was 13, Rin's death at his own hands in the same year, Minato's death shortly after, sealing the Nine Tails and leaving Kakashi as the sole surviving member of both his family and his team. 2 decades of loss, none of it processed through anything that could be reasonably called support or healing. All of it managed through the tools available to him. Distance, performance, the Icha books held in front of his face like a barrier. The chronic lateness that kept everyone waiting instead of close. The mask that literally covered his face in every interaction he ever had with another human being. These are not incidental character details. The chronic lateness is not a quirky habit that exists for comic relief. The book is not just a personality trait that makes him relatable. The mask is not just a visual design choice for the show. They are, collectively, a portrait of someone who has built an elaborate system of small distances between himself and the people around him. Someone who arrives late so the waiting is already established before the closeness begins. Someone who keeps a physical object between his face and the world at all times. Someone whose signature activity involves being absorbed in a story about fictional people instead of present with the real ones standing in front of him. Kakashi came to Team 7 with all of this in place. And the question that matters for understanding what his students received from him is not whether he cared about them. He did, genuinely. And that care grew over time into something real and deep. The question is whether a person carrying this much unprocessed grief, operating through this elaborate system of maintained distance, trained by ANBU to suppress rather than express, shaped since the age of 6, to believe that connection is a vulnerability. Whether that person could give 3 children what they actually needed from a teacher. What children need from a teacher, at the most fundamental level, is presence. Not just physical proximity. A teacher who shows up late to every meeting is already communicating something about how present they intend to be. Real presence. The kind where a student can feel that the person responsible for their development actually sees them as an individual, actually cares about their specific struggles and strengths and fears and needs, actually has enough emotional availability left after carrying their own weight to extend some of it outward. Emotional availability is the first thing trauma takes. This is not an opinion or an interpretation. It is consistent with how trauma functions in human beings. A person managing significant unprocessed trauma has less capacity for the kind of present, open, responsive engagement that teaching requires, because a significant portion of their available internal resources are being used to manage and contain what they are carrying. This is not a moral failing. It is a practical consequence of something they did not choose. Kakashi did not choose to watch his father die. He did not choose to lose Obito and Rin and Minato. He did not choose to spend his formative years in an organization that rewarded the suppression of feeling and penalized its expression. These things happened to him, and they shaped him in ways that were not his fault and that he had very little power to change without support he was never given. But the children in his care did not choose those things either. Naruto did not choose to have a teacher whose primary coping tools were distance and deflection. Sasuke did not choose to have a teacher whose own unprocessed trauma made it difficult to engage with Sasuke's trauma in the sustained, patient, present way it required. Sakura did not choose to have a teacher whose attention was divided between surveillance obligations, personal mirrors, and the management of a grief so large it had been running in the background of everything he did since he was 6 years old. There is a specific way Kakashi's PTSD expressed itself in his teaching that is worth naming directly. He saw his own past in his students. This is documented. He said himself that Team 7 mirrored Team Minato. Naruto was Obito. Sasuke was young Kakashi. Sakura was Rin. And a teacher who sees their students as versions of people they have lost does not see their students. They see the lost people. They respond to the ghosts. They make decisions shaped by what they wish they had done differently with the people who are no longer there, and they overlay those decisions onto children who are not those people, and who have their own separate, specific needs that do not map onto the past the teacher is managing. Kakashi gave Sasuke, his mirror, the student who most resembled who he had been, the most personal attention, and his most personal technique. This tracks perfectly with a teacher trying to correct the mistakes of his own past through the student who looks most like his past self. It makes complete psychological sense. It was also not primarily about Sasuke. It was about Kakashi, and the students who did not fit neatly into the grief-shaped roles he was unconsciously assigning, or who fit into roles that did not carry the same weight of personal guilt, received proportionally less of him. The memorial stone visits, the conversations with people who cannot respond, the mask, the book, the lateness, the Anbu history, the father's suicide, the teammate crushed under rocks, the girl who died on his own technique, the sensei who sealed himself away and left Kakashi alone at 13. All of that was in the room every single time Kakashi showed up to teach. His students felt it even when they could not name it. They felt the distance built into how he operated. They felt the limits of what he could extend to them. They grew in spite of those limits because children are resilient, and Naruto and Sakura and Sasuke were all exceptional in their own ways. But resilience is not the same as being well taught, and exceptional students are not proof that their teacher did everything right. Kakashi's trauma is not an excuse for his failures as a teacher. It is an explanation of them. There is a difference, and holding that difference carefully is the only way to be fair to everyone involved, including Kakashi, who deserved support he never received and who did the best he could with what he had been left with. But the deepest layer of why his teaching record looks the way it does is not in the specific decisions he made about individual students. It is in this. A man standing at a stone monument talking to the dead, day after day, carrying 20 years of loss with no way to set it down, walking into a classroom where 3 children needed him to be more present than his entire history had trained him to be. That gap between what his students needed and what his history had left him able to give is the most honest explanation for almost every failure this essay has examined. But there is one more layer underneath even this one, because Kakashi did not arrive at his damaged, grief-carrying, distance-maintaining approach to people by accident. He learned it. He was shaped by a specific environment, a specific system, a specific set of expectations about what ninja were supposed to be and what they were supposed to feel. __quote _6 __. And that system, the one that produced Kakashi the way it did the exact same thing to his students that it had done to him. It just did it one generation later, with different names on the same wounds. Section 8. The Mirror Problem. Team 7 as a reenactment of Team Minato. Kakashi said it himself. Not once, not in a moment of passing observation that could be dismissed as coincidence. He said it clearly, returned to it, and the show built an entire visual argument around it. Team 7, the group of 3 children placed in his care, mirrored his own experience as a student under Minato in ways that were too specific and too numerous to be accidental. The show confirmed this parallel explicitly. The Narutopedia documents it directly, and Kakashi himself acknowledged it across multiple points in both Part 1 and Shippuden. Naruto Uzumaki and Obito Uchiha. Both wanted to become Hokage. Both were considered the weakest and least impressive members of their respective teams. Both were raised without their parents by someone else in the village. Both had a long-standing rivalry with the cold, more talented boy on their team. Both were loud about their feelings in a way that made the more reserved members of the group uncomfortable. Both believed completely and without reservation that protecting teammates mattered more than completing a mission. Both had a habit of rushing into situations without thinking and needing to be saved by their teacher. The list goes on, and the show is not subtle about it. There is even a photograph, an actual image within the show, of Team Minato that is composed almost identically to a photograph of Team 7. Same positions, same energy, same relationships mapped onto different faces. Sasuke Uchiha and young Kakashi Hatake. Both were prodigies who graduated ahead of their peers, and who everyone around them identified immediately as exceptional. Both were emotionally cold in a way that came from specific loss rather than from an absence of feeling. Both prioritized the mission over the people around them, at least at the beginning. Both had a complicated relationship with an older sibling figure whose shadow they lived inside. Both were driven by something darker than simple ambition, a need to prove something to a world that had already shown them its cruelest face. Both possessed a lightning chakra nature and a capacity for the Sharingan. Both kept people at a distance using competence as a barrier, letting their skill do the work of connection so that actual closeness was never required. Sakura Haruno and Rin Nohara. Both were the female members of their three-person teams. Both were intelligent and academically capable in ways their louder, more physically talented teammates were not. Both had exceptional chakra control that marked them as having real potential in areas requiring precision rather than raw power. Both cared deeply about the boys on their team in ways the show sometimes reduced to romantic feeling, but that were actually more complex than that. Both were, in their respective teams, the member most often left to manage the emotional reality of the group, while the other two competed with each other. This is not a fan theory. It is built into the architecture of the show and confirmed by Kakashi himself. He knew he was looking at a mirror. He knew these three children were, in meaningful ways, a version of the three children he had been part of. The question the essay needs to sit with is not whether the parallel existed. It did. It is documented. Kakashi confirmed it. The question is what Kakashi did with that knowledge, and what it cost his students when the answer turned out to be, he unconsciously let it run him. A teacher who sees their students as individuals, as specific, separate people with their own histories and their own needs, and their own particular paths to growth, makes decisions based on who those students actually are. A teacher who sees their students as echoes of people from their own past makes decisions based on who those past people were, what those past people needed, what the teacher wishes they had done differently the first time around. These two modes of teaching produce very different outcomes, and the difference is most visible not in the moments of success, but in the moments of failure. Kakashi's relationship with Sasuke is the clearest example of what happens when the mirror takes over. He identified Sasuke as similar to himself. He said this directly. And from the moment that identification was made, a significant portion of what Kakashi gave Sasuke was not actually for Sasuke. It was for young Kakashi. It was the attention, the technique, the personal investment that young Kakashi had needed and had not fully received in the ways that would have helped most. Minato had been a good teacher to Kakashi in many respects. Skilled, capable of genuine warmth, attentive to Kakashi's abilities. But Minato had also missed Kakashi's PTSD entirely, had failed to provide the kind of sustained emotional engagement that Kakashi's grief required, and had ultimately pointed him toward ANBU rather than toward healing. Kakashi was not going to make that mistake with Sasuke. He was going to be present in a way Minato had not been. He was going to give Sasuke what he himself had needed. He was going to use the month before the Chunin exam finals not just to build Sasuke's power, but to reach him emotionally, to have the conversation that mattered, to try to pull him back from the edge before it became too late. The problem is that Sasuke was not young Kakashi. He shared certain surface qualities: the coldness, the drive, the grief-fueled focus. But the specifics of his situation were different in ways that mattered enormously. Young Kakashi's coldness came from a father's suicide and a rigid, self-protective belief system that could be challenged through argument and experience. Sasuke's coldness came from watching his entire family be murdered by someone he had loved, which is a wound of a completely different shape. Young Kakashi needed to be shown that rules were not the only thing keeping him safe, that people were worth the risk of connection. Sasuke needed something much more specific and much more difficult. He needed to be helped to build a reason to live that was not entirely structured around a single act of violence against one person. Kakashi gave Sasuke the intervention he would have needed himself. It did not fit what Sasuke actually needed, and it did not hold. The Naruto and Obito parallel ran into a similar problem, though it expressed itself differently. Kakashi had a complicated relationship with Obito, one that had started with dismissal and condescension, that had been transformed by Obito's death into something carried with tremendous guilt, and that had ultimately become the single most important philosophical influence on Kakashi's adult life. Everything Kakashi believed about teamwork, about people mattering more than missions, about not abandoning the people beside you. All of it came from Obito. Obito, who Kakashi had dismissed as weak and sentimental when they were children, had turned out to be the wisest person on their team. And Kakashi had spent the years since Obito's apparent death trying to honor that wisdom, trying to live by it, trying to be the teammate and the person that Obito's example had shown him he should have been all along. When Naruto arrived, loud, overlooked, dreaming of being Hokage in a way no one took seriously, insisting that the people beside him mattered more than his own advancement, Kakashi was not seeing a new person. He was seeing Obito. And the specific guilt Kakashi carried about Obito, the guilt of a person who had dismissed someone as unimportant and then watched that person die before he could correct that dismissal, meant that his relationship with Naruto was never quite free of that weight. On the surface, this produced something that looked like care, because caring about Naruto as the person who most reminded Kakashi of the teammate he most needed to make peace with is at least a form of caring. It was real. But it was filtered through loss in a way that made it complicated and sometimes less useful than it appeared. Kakashi referred Naruto to Ebisu during the preparation month, not just because Sasuke had a more urgent claim on his attention, but because Naruto, the Obito surrogate, the one whose fundamental rightness Kakashi had already accepted philosophically, did not feel like someone who needed to be built. He felt like someone whose nature Kakashi already understood, whose approach to the world Kakashi had already endorsed, whose growth could be trusted to happen because Obito had been right all along, and Naruto was Obito. This is exactly the kind of mistake a teacher makes when they see an echo instead of a person. Obito had been right about the value of people over missions, but Obito had also had specific weaknesses and gaps that his teacher Minato had not fully addressed. Naruto had his own specific weaknesses and gaps that required direct attention from a teacher who saw them as Naruto's weaknesses, not as familiar features of a person Kakashi had already processed and grieved and accepted. The month Naruto spent with Ebisu while Kakashi trained Sasuke was not just the favoritism problem, it was also the mirror problem. Kakashi investing in the reflection of himself relative to the reflection of the person whose rightness he had already accepted, without seeing either of them clearly enough. And then there is Sakura and the Rin parallel, which may be the most painful dimension of the mirror problem when you look at it directly. Rin Nohara died at Kakashi's hands. He knows this. He visits her name on the memorial stone. He carries the specific guilt of a person who killed the teammate he had promised Obito he would protect, even though Rin chose it, even though there was no way in that moment to prevent it, even though the show is clear that Rin acted to save the village and that Kakashi bears no moral blame for what happened. He carries it anyway, because that is what grief does when it is not treated. It does not follow logic, it follows feeling, and the feeling of having been the instrument of Rin's death is one Kakashi has never escaped. With Rin's echo, he felt something that the show does not name directly, but that the pattern of his behavior makes visible. He kept Sakura at the greatest distance of the three. He gave her the least. He saw her potential clearly, he said so more than once, and he did not act on what he saw. A person haunted by someone they could not save sometimes finds it difficult to invest fully in the person who reminds them of that loss. Not because they do not care, because caring about that person activates a grief that is still too large to sit with comfortably. This is not something the show states explicitly as Kakashi's reason for neglecting Sakura. The show does not give us a scene where Kakashi looks at Sakura and consciously thinks about Rin. But the structure of his behavior, the clear acknowledgement of her potential combined with the consistent failure to develop it, the distance he maintained specifically with her compared to his other two students, is consistent with a person managing something they cannot fully face. What makes all of this particularly significant for understanding Kakashi's failure as a teacher is that the mirror problem is not something he could have simply chosen to stop doing. Seeing your students as echoes of your past is not a decision. It is something that happens beneath the level of conscious choice, driven by grief and guilt and the brain's tendency to organize new experiences around the categories it already knows. You cannot simply decide to stop doing this any more than you can decide to stop dreaming. What you can do, with help and support, and the kind of sustained reflection that Kakashi was never provided with, is become aware of it. And that awareness, imperfect as it always is, can create enough distance between the echo and the person to allow you to see the person more clearly. Kakashi was never given that help. He was never given the tools to recognize when he was responding to Team 7 and when he was responding to Team Minato's ghosts. And so the mirror ran mostly uninterrupted through his years with these three children, shaping who received what and why in ways that had more to do with his past than with their present. The show ultimately redeems this, as it redeems most things about Kakashi, because it loves him and wants his arc to land on hope rather than failure. He grows, he becomes more present, he develops genuine relationships with all three of his students that move beyond the echo towards something real. By the time Naruto comes back from his 2.5 years with Jiraiya, there is something between them that is its own thing, not just a ghost wearing Naruto's face. But that growth happened largely after the most formative period of his students' development was already over. The mirror was most active, most unquestioned, most consequential during the months that shaped who Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura were going to become as ninja. And by the time Team 7 was old enough for Kakashi to see them more clearly, they had already been sent to find their most important teachers elsewhere. __quote_7__. Which brings us to the most documented and least complicated part of this entire argument. Not the psychology, not the trauma, not the parallels to the past. Just the plain, verifiable fact of where Naruto and Sakura's most significant growth actually happened, and whose name was attached to it when it did. Section 9. Naruto and Sakura's growth happened without him. When Naruto Uzumaki came back to the Hidden Leaf Village after 2.5 years away, Kakashi gave him and Sakura another bell test. This time, the objective was not to assess whether they understood teamwork. Kakashi already knew they understood teamwork. That had been established years earlier. This second bell test, which happens at the very beginning of Shippuden, was designed to show how much they had grown, and the results were remarkable. Naruto and Sakura came close to actually beating Kakashi. They pushed him hard enough that he had to engage seriously rather than hold back. Sakura landed a hit that surprised him. Naruto forced him into a position where he had to cover his ears and close his eyes to avoid hearing a spoiler for his Icha Icha book, which Naruto used as a strategy to take away Kakashi's ability to read their movements with his Sharingan. It was creative, it was effective, and it demonstrated a level of skill and tactical thinking that was genuinely impressive. Kakashi was proud. The show presents his reaction as that of a teacher watching the results of his work pay off. And the fandom largely received it the same way, as evidence that whatever Kakashi had done with Team 7, it had worked. Because look at how far these two had come. But here's the question that the bell test result does not answer, and that the show does not stop to ask. Where did this growth actually come from? Who built the Naruto and Sakura that walked back into that clearing and nearly took Kakashi's bells? Because the answer, when you trace it carefully through the documented facts of what happened during those 2.5 years, is not Kakashi. Start with Naruto. When Naruto left the Hidden Leaf at the end of Part 1 to train with Jiraiya, he had the Rasengan, a technique he had learned not from Kakashi, but from Jiraiya himself, who taught it to him during the period between the Chunin exams and the retrieval mission for Sasuke. He had shadow clones, which he had learned from a forbidden scroll before he even graduated, not from Kakashi. He had the raw power of the Nine Tails inside him, which was not taught to him by anyone. What he did not have was refined technique, a developed fighting style, an understanding of his own chakra nature, or the ability to do much beyond throw shadow clones at a problem and hope the quantity overwhelmed the opposition. Jiraiya spent 2.5 years fixing that. The training under Jiraiya is not shown in complete detail. The show jumps over most of it with the time skip. But what is documented is significant. Jiraiya worked with Naruto on controlling the Nine Tails chakra, which was one of the most dangerous and technically demanding challenges in the entire series. He helped Naruto develop his physical capabilities, his combat awareness, and his understanding of how to function as a ninja in high-stakes situations without relying entirely on the fox's power or sheer numbers of clones. By the time Naruto came back to the village, he was operating at a completely different level than when he left, and the documented reasons for that are Jiraiya's instruction and Naruto's own relentless effort. Not Kakashi's preparation, not the foundation Kakashi had built, Jiraiya's work and Naruto's work. Then, in Shippuden itself, when Naruto began the process of developing his wind nature and eventually creating the wind-style Rasengan, the technique that became one of his signature moves in the second half of the series, Kakashi was involved in the early stages. He identified Naruto's chakra nature as wind, which was genuinely useful. He explained the basic concept of nature transformation and gave Naruto a starting exercise with a piece of paper. This is documented and real and worth acknowledging. But what happened after that starting point is equally documented and equally important. Naruto took the concept Kakashi handed him and developed the wind-style Rasengan almost entirely through his own effort, using hundreds of shadow clones to compress what would normally be years of practice into a much shorter period. Kakashi's role in that process was the starting line, the identification of the nature type and the initial explanation. The actual technique, the months of grinding work, the breakthrough moments, the final form of the attack that became one of the most powerful moves in the series, those came from Naruto. The show is honest about this. Kakashi even told Naruto at one point that the wind-style Rasengan was something he himself could not complete, because adding nature transformation to the Rasengan was beyond what Kakashi had been able to figure out. His student did something his teacher could not do, and he did it primarily through his own effort rather than through direct instruction. This is an important detail to sit with. Kakashi pointed Naruto toward a door, and then told him he himself had never been able to open it. Naruto opened it anyway. That is remarkable. It says something true and significant about who Naruto is as a person. But it is not evidence of Kakashi's teaching. It is evidence of Naruto's ability to grow beyond what his teacher could provide, which is a different and less flattering thing when you are assessing Kakashi specifically. Now look at Sakura. When Sakura went to Tsunade at the end of Part 1, she had tree-climbing chakra control and a basic genjutsu release. She was, by the show's own honest accounting, the least combat-ready member of Team 7. She had intelligence and potential, and a sharpness that everyone who looked at her could see. Kakashi included, as he said so multiple times. What she did not have was a foundation built by anyone who had taken that intelligence and potential and actually done something purposeful with it. Tsunade did something purposeful with it. What Tsunade saw in Sakura was what Kakashi had seen and acknowledged and then not acted on. She saw the chakra control. She saw the intelligence. She saw the specific combination of those two things and recognized it as the foundation for medical ability of an extraordinary kind. And she built on it. The training Sakura received under Tsunade transformed her from the weakest combat member of her team into one of the most capable medical ninja in the village, and eventually, one of the strongest ninja in the entire series. The superhuman strength Sakura developed, the ability to concentrate chakra into her fists and release it with enough force to shatter the ground and send shockwaves through opponents, came from Tsunade's instruction. The medical skills that made Sakura able to save lives on the battlefield, to heal injuries that would kill most people, to operate under pressure in the middle of active combat situations. Those came from Tsunade's instruction. The version of Sakura that the fandom respects, the one that the show eventually presents as a match for the most powerful opponents in the world, was not built by Kakashi. It was built by Tsunade. And the timeline matters here in a way that deserves specific attention. Sakura trained under Tsunade for the same 2.5 years that Naruto trained under Jiraiya. That is not a long time in the context of how most skills are developed. 2.5 years, starting from the limited foundation Kakashi had given her, produced a ninja that Tsunade herself eventually acknowledged as her equal in specific areas. The ceiling Sakura reached under Tsunade's instruction, in the same time frame that Kakashi had her and did not build that foundation, tells you something precise about what had been missing. The something that was missing was a teacher who saw Sakura specifically, who built a training approach around her actual abilities rather than around the gaps in their own past, who had enough emotional availability and enough focused attention to invest in Sakura as an individual priority rather than a third wheel on a team organized around two other concerns. Tsunade gave Sakura all of those things, and Sakura, who had spent Part 1 showing determination and intelligence in conditions that were nowhere near equipped to develop her, exploded under that instruction. The potential was never the question. The question was always whether someone with the right perspective and the right investment was going to meet it. Kakashi, by the beginning of Shippuden, had recognized that Sakura would surpass Tsunade. He said this explicitly when Team 7 reformed after the time skip. He saw it clearly. And here's the thing about that prediction that is worth sitting with. Kakashi made it at the beginning of Shippuden, after Tsunade had already been training Sakura for 2.5 years. He predicted Sakura would surpass the person who had already built her into something remarkable. He did not predict that when he had her, when the foundation could still have been shaped by him. He predicted it when the work was already largely done by someone else, and framed that prediction as something like pride in his student. The pride was real. Kakashi genuinely cared about Sakura and believed in her. But believing in someone after the fact, after another teacher has done the foundational work, and calling the result of that other teacher's work your student's growth, that is a complicated form of pride. It is the pride of a person who planted a seed, left it in dry soil for a year, and then watched someone else water it into a tree. There is a version of the defense that appears at this point in any honest discussion of Kakashi's teaching record. It goes like this. Kakashi did not fail his students, because his students turned out exceptional. Naruto became the 7th Hokage. Sakura became one of the greatest medical ninja the Hidden Leaf had ever produced. Sasuke, even accounting for everything he went through, eventually returned to the village and became one of its most powerful protectors. These are remarkable outcomes. These are people who changed the world. How can you call Kakashi a failure when his students did all of that? The answer requires separating two things that are easy to conflate, but that are fundamentally different. A student's outcome is not the same as their teacher's contribution to that outcome. Naruto became the 7th Hokage because of his own extraordinary character, Jiraiya's instruction, the 9 tails inside him, the relationships he built with people across multiple villages, and years of effort that continued long after Kakashi's direct influence was most active. Sakura became who she became because of Tsunade's instruction and her own determined effort. Sasuke became who he eventually became in spite of much of what happened under Kakashi's watch, and through a long journey that involved Orochimaru, the Akatsuki, and eventually the influence of Naruto himself in ways that had nothing to do with Team 7 as a teaching unit. Exceptional students who grow into exceptional people do not retroactively prove that every teacher they had was exceptional. They often prove the opposite, that their own ability and determination was strong enough to survive instruction that was inadequate or misdirected, and to find the growth they needed from other sources when the primary source did not provide it. Naruto found that growth with Jiraiya. Sakura found it with Tsunade. Both of them found it in the 2.5 years they spent away from Kakashi, being taught by people who had chosen them specifically and whose entire attention was organized around their development, rather than divided between surveillance obligations, personal mirrors, and the management of 20 years of unprocessed grief. This is not a claim that Kakashi contributed nothing. He contributed the bell test lesson, the foundational understanding that teamwork matters above individual success. And that lesson was real and important, and the show documents its value across both parts of the series, including in the final battle against Kaguya, where Team 7 essentially ran the bell test at the highest possible stakes. He contributed the tree climbing training in the Land of Waves, which gave all 3 of them a better understanding of chakra control under pressure. He contributed his presence on missions, his protection in situations that would have killed them without a Jonin available, his strategic thinking in combat conditions that went far beyond anything 3 newly graduated genin should have been facing. These are real contributions. Listing them matters, because an honest accounting is not a one-sided one. But contributions are not the same as teaching, and the specific, individual, technique-level development that transforms a student from a promising beginner into the ninja they are capable of becoming, that work was done almost entirely by other people, with other teachers, in other places. The most significant growth in Naruto's technical ability happened under Jiraiya and through his own effort. The most significant growth in Sakura's ability happened under Tsunade. The most significant growth in Sasuke's ability happened under Orochimaru, which is its own kind of damning commentary on how the system surrounding Kakashi produced outcomes even worse than his own teaching failures. And none of them, across all of Part 1, became Chunin. Kakashi's students, all 3 of them, in the one competitive evaluation that their society used to measure a ninja's development and readiness, did not make it. Not one. The man whose previous genin teams had a 100% failure rate going back to his first assignment had a team that failed the one formal measurement the village provided. The Bell test result at the beginning of Shippuden was real. Naruto and Sakura had genuinely grown. They were impressive, and Kakashi's reaction to them was genuine pride. But the growth he was witnessing was not primarily his to be proud of. It was Jiraiya's. It was Tsunade's. It was Naruto's own impossible determination and Sakura's own disciplined effort, meeting teachers who finally met them back. All of which raises the question that the entire essay has been building toward, quietly, underneath every section. Not just what Kakashi failed to give his students, and not just why he failed to give it, but why someone as intelligent as Kakashi, as self-aware as he showed himself to be, as genuinely caring as the show documents him being, why did he end up in this position at all? Why was a person this clearly shaped for failure as a teacher handed children to teach in the first place? Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The answer is not about Kakashi, not entirely. It is about the system that produced him, the same system that produced his students, and the same system that was doing to Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura exactly what it had done to Kakashi a generation before. Section 10. The Systemic Failure. Kakashi was never taught how to teach. Kakashi Hatake graduated from the Ninja Academy at 5 years old. Not 12, which was the normal age. Not 9, which was considered early. 5. 1 year of study and he was done, ranked at the top of his class. Recognized immediately as a generational talent, unlike anything the village had seen in some time. He was given a headband and a rank, and a place on a genin team before most children his age had learned to read with any real confidence. He made Chunin at 6. He was promoted to Jonin, the rank that puts you in charge of leading other people, including children, into active danger, at 12 years old. 12. The same age that Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura were when they graduated from the academy as ordinary students following the normal path. The age Kakashi was made responsible for leading a combat team in a world war was the age his future students were still learning the basics. And then, at 13, he was placed in Anbu. These are not background details, they are the facts that explain everything else. Because the question that the previous 9 sections have been circling, why did a person as intelligent and capable and genuinely caring as Kakashi end up failing his students in the specific ways he did, cannot be answered by looking only at Kakashi. It has to be answered by looking at what the Hidden Leaf Village's system did to Kakashi before he ever stood in front of a student. The system that produced Kakashi Hatake took a child who lost his father to suicide at 6 years old, and rather than providing that child with support, grief counseling, or any form of emotional care, accelerated his development through the ranks as fast as his talent allowed. It gave him more responsibility at each stage of his childhood, not less. It promoted him, recognized him, praised his skill, and pointed him toward the next challenge. What it never did, at any point in his documented history, was stop and ask whether the person advancing through all those ranks was actually okay. Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, was Kakashi's Jonin leader. He was by most accounts a genuinely good person, warm, thoughtful, deeply committed to the people in his life. He is one of the most beloved characters in the series for reasons that are real and earned. But the show is also honest, in the details if not always in the framing, about what Minato missed with Kakashi. He saw Kakashi struggling after Obito's death and Rin's death. He recognized the symptoms of what was happening to his student. His response was to give Kakashi a sense of purpose by assigning him to ANBU, believing that having something meaningful to do would help him survive the grief. This was not a cruel decision. It came from genuine concern. But it was a decision shaped entirely by the logic of the system both of them were operating inside. A system that understood people primarily as ninja, that measured health in terms of functionality and mission performance, that had no real framework for what a 13-year-old needed after watching both of his teammates die and killing one of them with his own hands. The system could see that Kakashi was not performing at his best. It could not see, or chose not to see, that what Kakashi needed was not a new mission, but a human being willing to sit with him in his grief without redirecting him toward the next objective. Minato failed Kakashi the same way Kakashi later failed Sasuke. He saw the emotional reality, engaged with it briefly and sincerely, and then responded by doing what the system trained him to do. pointing his student towards something productive rather than staying present with something painful. The pattern did not start with Kakashi. It was handed to him, already running, by the person who was supposed to teach him what a teacher looked like. Now look at what the system did to Kakashi's students. Naruto Uzumaki grew up in the Hidden Leaf Village, knowing that most of the adults around him were afraid of him or angry at him, without anyone ever explaining why. The third Hokage, who was aware of the situation and who could have intervened in multiple ways to ensure Naruto had some stable adult presence in his life, made the decision to keep Naruto's parentage secret and to allow him to grow up largely isolated. The reasoning? That knowing he was the fourth Hokage's son might make him a target. That keeping the secret of the Nine Tails protected the village was the reasoning of a man thinking about the system's needs rather than the child's needs. Naruto spent 12 years as the loneliest child in the village because the people responsible for him prioritized what was safe for Konoha over what was necessary for Naruto. This is not a small thing. This is a child being failed at the most basic level, before he ever entered a classroom or met a Jonin leader, by the structure of the community that was supposed to care for him. By the time Kakashi received Naruto, the damage from those 12 years was already present and already significant. And Kakashi, who was himself a product of a system that had failed him in adjacent ways, was not equipped to address it. He had never been shown how. No one had ever addressed it for him. Sasuke Uchiha's situation is even more extreme, because the system's failure in his case was not passive neglect, but active catastrophe. The Uchiha clan massacre, the event that destroyed Sasuke's family and created the wound that drove everything he did across the entire series, was not simply a tragedy that happened. It was an event the Hidden Leaf's leadership knew about in advance, debated, and ultimately authorized. The third Hokage was aware that Itachi was going to kill the Uchiha clan. The village's leadership made a calculated decision about the political situation involving the Uchiha, and concluded that allowing the massacre was preferable to the alternatives they were weighing. Sasuke was a child, the youngest member of a family he loved, and the system that was supposed to protect him made a decision that destroyed everything he had. Then that same system put him on a team with a teacher who had been broken by that same system a generation earlier, and expected the teacher to heal the student's wound with tools the system had never provided. The expectation was impossible from the start. Not because Kakashi was not capable of caring. He was, and he did. Not because Sasuke was beyond reach. The show makes clear, in the conversation where Sasuke was about to come back before the Sound 4 arrived, that he was not. But because the depth of what Sasuke needed, sustained, patient, professional, emotionally informed support that could meet the specific shape of his grief and rage, was something the ninja system of Konoha had no infrastructure to provide. There were no grief counselors in the Hidden Leaf. There were no mental health resources documented in the show's world that a Jonin leader could refer his student to. There was the academy, there were missions, there were training grounds, and there was whatever the Jonin leader could manage to offer in the gaps between those things. Kakashi could offer skill, strategic thinking, occasional emotional honesty when the situation demanded it, and one conversation at a critical moment. The system gave him nothing else to work with. Sakura's case shows the system's failure in its quietest and, in some ways, most honest form. Sakura was placed on Team 7 because she would benefit from her teammates, as stated directly in the canon description of how the team was assembled. She was not placed there because the team needed what she offered. She was placed there as a recipient of other people's strengths, which means the system looked at this intelligent, capable girl with exceptional chakra control and the highest academic scores of the three, and its assessment of her value was that she would be useful as a supporting presence for two more important students. This is the system telling a child, through the structure of how it organized her life, that she was secondary, that the most significant thing about her placement on this team was what she would receive from it, not what she would contribute to it. And then it assigned her to a teacher who, for all the documented reasons this essay has examined, was going to give her the least of himself, not out of malice, but because the system had already told both of them where she ranked. Tsunade eventually fixed this, but Tsunade fixing it does not excuse the years Sakura spent being treated as a third wheel by a structure that should have recognized her potential from the beginning. The system also never taught Kakashi how to teach. This sounds obvious when you say it directly, but it is worth sitting with because it is the most fundamental problem of all. Kakashi was promoted through every rank based on his ability to perform as a ninja. He was assessed on his combat skill, his mission success rate, his strategic thinking, his ability to copy and deploy techniques. At no point in his documented advancement, not at 5 when he graduated, not at 6 when he made Chunin, not at 12 when he became Jonin, not at 13 when he entered ANBU, did anyone sit down with him and discuss what it means to actually develop another person? What different students need at different stages of their growth? How to identify and respond to emotional distress in young people? How to build training plans that account for individual differences rather than applying the same approach to everyone? How to be present with a student's pain rather than redirecting it toward productivity? None of this was in the system. The system produced exceptional ninja and then assigned them to lead children based on rank, relationship, and political considerations rather than any demonstrated ability to teach. Guy was a Jonin leader, and he was an extraordinary teacher. But Guy's exceptional investment in his students was his own personal characteristic, something he brought to the role rather than something the system prepared him for. Asuma was a Jonin leader, and he had a meaningful relationship with Shikamaru. But again, that was Asuma's personal quality meeting Shikamaru's particular nature, not a system-produced outcome. The Hidden Leaf assigned Kakashi to Team 7 with a surveillance mission, a personal mirror, 20 years of untreated trauma, 100% previous failure rate, and 0 training in how to develop young people. And then, when Sasuke defected and Team 7 dissolved, and all 3 students went to find their real instruction elsewhere, the system moved on. Kakashi resumed his mission schedule. Naruto went to Jiraiya, Sakura went to Tsunade, and the failure that had just occurred, the complete breakdown of the first teaching relationship all 3 of those children had as ninja, was not examined, not addressed, not used to ask any systemic questions about how Jonin leaders were being selected and what they were being prepared to do. It just moved on. The way systems always move on when the cost of what they have done is paid by individuals rather than by the structure itself. Kakashi eventually became Hokage. He led the village. He was, by most accounts within the show's world, a good Hokage. Thoughtful, capable, committed to the people in his care in a way that his years of growth and loss had genuinely shaped into something valuable. He prepared Naruto for leadership. He remained involved in the lives of his former students in ways that showed real affection and genuine investment. And Naruto eventually became Hokage himself. Sakura became one of the greatest medical ninja the village had ever produced. Sasuke came back and became one of its most powerful protectors. The outcomes, at the level of the individuals, were remarkable. But none of those outcomes change what happened during the years that mattered most for these 3 children's development as ninja and as people. None of them changed the 100% previous failure rate, the surveillance assignment that divided Kakashi's attention before it began, the favoritism that gave Sasuke everything and Sakura almost nothing, the Chunin exam recommendation that put unprepared students in front of someone who marked one of them for darkness, the Chidori handed to a grieving boy who used it to try to kill his best friend, the self-accounting of a teacher who admitted he had not done enough only after the student was already gone, the PTSD that reduced his emotional availability in ways he never chose and never fully overcame, the mirror that turned his students into ghosts before he learned to see them clearly, and the 2.5 years his students spent growing into the ninja they became under teachers who were not him. The system that produced all of this is still standing at the end of the series. Konoha continues. New children will graduate from the academy. New Jonin leaders will be assigned based on rank and relationship and political considerations. Some of them will be Guy, extraordinary teachers by virtue of their own exceptional nature. Some of them will be Kakashi, people who care deeply and genuinely, but who arrive in the classroom carrying damage the system created and never helped them put down. The children assigned to those leaders will feel the difference. They will grow in spite of the gaps, because children are resilient, and because exceptional people find ways to become exceptional even when the conditions around them are not designed to help them. But resilience is not the same as being well cared for. And the distance between what Naruto and Sakura and Sasuke eventually became and what they might have become with better, more prepared, more emotionally present instruction from the beginning, that distance belongs to the system. Kakashi Hatake failed every student he taught, and the system that made him never gave him the tools to do anything different. That is the most honest thing this essay can say. Not that Kakashi was a villain because he was not. Not that he did not care because he did. But that a person shaped by loss and war and 20 years of untreated grief, trained to suppress feeling and prioritize the mission, assigned to children for reasons that had nothing to do with his ability to teach them, working inside a structure that had no real understanding of what young people needed from the adults responsible for their development. That person was always going to leave gaps. The gaps were not Kakashi's alone. They were the system's gaps, running through Kakashi, landing on 3 children who deserved better than any of it, and who, through their own remarkable nature, found ways to grow into people the world would remember anyway. That might be the most Naruto thing about the whole story. The kids were always going to be okay. They were always going to find a way through. Not because the system served them well, but because they were exactly the kind of people who survive systems that fail them and become something extraordinary on the other side. Kakashi knew that about them, eventually. He saw it clearly when it had already happened, the way he saw most things clearly, after the fact, with honesty, carrying the weight of what he had not done while watching what they had become. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.